The massive alien ship filled the main view screen. It was long and dark, like a metal knife in the night. This was the Xylosian dreadnought, the World Reaper. It hung in the silence of space above a human colony world. The colony was quiet now. Its lights were out. The Xylosians had won. Inside the ship, a group of humans stood in a large, cold room. The air smelled strange, like metal and something sour. The humans were prisoners. They wore simple gray clothes. Their hands were bound by energy cuffs. One of them was a man named Jin. He was not a soldier. He was a mechanic. He was good at fixing things, at understanding how machines worked. Now he was trying to understand how to survive. He looked at the aliens surrounding them. The Xylosians were tall and reptilian. They had greenish scales and cold black eyes. They stood perfectly still, holding their powerful weapons. They did not speak. Their silence was more frightening than any shout. The door to the chamber hissed open. Another Xylosian walked in. He was taller than the others. His scales had a pattern of darker green like old scars. This was Commander Kael'thar. He moved with an air of complete control. He looked at the group of humans as if they were insects. Next to Jin, a woman named Mina shifted her weight. She was a scientist, smart and sharp. She usually had an answer for everything. Now her face was pale. She had no answers here. Kael'thar stopped in front of them. His voice was a low hiss translated by a device on his uniform. "You are the survivors," he said. The words were flat without feeling. "Your world is ours. Your people serve us or they are dead. You are of no use. But we are not wasteful. We offer you a chance." Jin kept his eyes on the commander. He knew this chance would be a trap. But a trap was better than a certain death right here. "There is a planet," Kael'thar continued. A star map appeared in the air behind him. It showed a remote solar system. One planet was marked with a red symbol. "We call it the Silent Grave. It holds a great power. A defense system. We believe it is a weapon." He let the word hang in the air. Weapon. Jin felt a small flicker of hope. If they could get a weapon. "Our ships cannot approach it," Kael'thar said, and Jin's hope died. "Our probes go silent. Our scouts do not return. It is a place of death. For us?" The commander's lips pulled back, showing sharp teeth. It was not a smile. "But you are humans. You are loud. You are reckless. You are expendable. Perhaps your primitive nature will be an advantage." He pointed a long, clawed finger at the planet on the map. "You will go to the surface. You will take our sensor equipment. You will find what is there. You will deactivate it. If you succeed, you will signal us. And you will be spared. You can live." It was a lie. Everyone in the room knew it was a lie. The Xylosians did not let people live. They used them and threw them away. A man named Chul, who had been a soldier, stepped forward. His face was hard. "And if we refuse?" he asked, his voice rough. Kael'thar did not even look at him. One of the Xylosian guards raised its weapon. There was a bright flash of light. A man at the back of the group cried out and fell to the floor. He was not moving. The air smelled of burned flesh. "That is your other choice," Kael'thar said, his voice still calm. There was no more discussion. They were going to the Silent Grave. They were given basic survival packs. A suit to help them breathe, some food and water, a few tools. The Xylosian sensor equipment was a heavy, black box with blinking lights. A young woman named Sue, who was good with computers, was put in charge of carrying it. Her hands were shaking. They were marched to a small old dropship. It was a piece of junk. Jin looked it over with his mechanic's eye. The engines were worn. The hull was thin. It was another part of the death sentence. They were shoved inside. The door closed with a final heavy sound. Jin found a seat next to Mina. Chul sat across from them, his jaw tight. Sue hugged the sensor box to her chest like a child. No one spoke. The engines rumbled to life. The ship shook violently. Then it was released from the World Reaper. They were falling. The ride down to the planet was terrible. The ship shook and groaned. Warning lights flashed on the control panel. Jin held onto his seat, his knuckles white. He looked out the small window. They were entering the atmosphere of a gray and brown world. There were no oceans, no green. It was a dead rock. Then he saw them. As they flew lower, he could see the ground was littered with shapes. Wreckage. The twisted metal of countless ships. Some were small scouts. Others were huge battleships broken in half. They were from many different species. This was a graveyard. "The Silent Grave," Mina whispered. The name was perfect. The pilot, another human conscript, tried to find a clear spot to land. The ship jerked and weaved through a canyon of broken metal. Suddenly, all the lights on the control panel went out. The engine noise died. The ship was completely dead. We've lost power, the pilot yelled. Everything's gone. The ship was no longer flying. It was falling. It dropped like a stone. Jin braced himself for the crash. It was a violent, screaming sound of metal tearing apart. He was thrown forward against his restraints. The world turned over and over. Then everything went black. When Jin opened his eyes, there was smoke and the smell of burning wires. He was hanging upside down in his seat. His head hurt. He could hear moans and cries around him. He managed to unbuckle himself and fell to the ceiling of the crashed ship. He looked around. The pilot was dead, impaled by a piece of the control panel. 2 other people were not moving. But he saw Chul, Mina, and Sue getting up. They were bruised and cut but alive. A few others were also stirring. They were lucky. The ship had crash-landed in a valley of soft gray sand, which had cushioned the impact. They helped each other out of the wreckage. They stood on the gray soil and looked at their new home. The sky was a dull, dark orange. The air was cold and thin. In every direction, as far as they could see, were the skeletons of dead starships. It was a silent metal forest. Okay, Chul said, taking charge. His voice was steady. First, we check the supplies. Then we get our bearings. So try to get that sensor box working. Tell the Xylosians we're here. Sue nodded and put the heavy box on the ground. She pressed the buttons on its side. Nothing happened. The lights on the box were dark. It's dead, she said, her voice small. It has no power. It's just a brick. Mina took out a small device from her pack. It was a personal communicator. Maybe I can get a short-range signal, just to see if anything else is alive out here. She turned it on. The device let out a burst of static. Then it too died. The screen went black. Jin felt a cold feeling in his stomach. It wasn't just the ship or the box. It was everything. He took out a small multi-tool from his pocket. It had a little light on it. He clicked the light. It shone for a second, then flickered and died. It's not a machine problem, Jin said, looking at the dead tool in his hand. It's this place. This place. Kills power. It kills signals. A deep, unnatural silence settled over them. There was no wind. No sound of insects or animals, nothing. It was the quietest place Jin had ever been. It was a silence that pressed in on your ears. It was heavy. Chul shook his head. Forget the box. Our mission is the same. We find this weapon or defense system. We shut it down. That's our only way out of here. How? Mina asked, her voice sharp with fear. How do we find anything? We can't use any technology. We have to walk? Where? We walk, Chul said firmly. We look for a source. A structure. Anything that isn't a wrecked ship. They gathered what supplies they could from the crashed dropship. It was not much. Some food packs. Some water. A few medical kits. Then they started walking. They chose a direction at random and began to move through the canyon of dead ships. The silence was the worst part. Their footsteps in the gray sand seemed too loud. Their breathing was like a roar. Jin kept looking around, his senses on high alert. He felt like they were being watched. After a few hours of walking, one of the men, a man named Park, stopped. He was looking at a large alien battleship that was half buried in the sand. Did you see that? Park asked, his voice a nervous whisper. See what? Chul said, a shadow. Inside that ship. It moved. Everyone stopped and looked. The wreck was dark and empty. There was nothing. You're seeing things, Chul said. It's the stress. Keep moving. They kept walking, but Jin had seen it too. A flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. When he turned his head, it was gone. A little later, Park started to fall behind. He was muttering to himself. It's so quiet, he said. I can't stand the quiet. He started to hum a tune just to make noise. Be quiet, Park, Chul ordered. We don't know what's out here. But Park kept humming, getting louder. He was becoming hysterical. The noise was jarring in the absolute silence. Then it happened. Park was just gone. One moment he was walking a few steps behind them, humming his nervous tune. The next moment there was no sound. Jin turned around. Park was standing still. His humming had stopped in the middle of a note. His eyes were wide open, but they were empty. There was no one behind them. He was like a shell, a statue. He did not move. He did not breathe. He was just blank. Then he fell forward into the sand. He did not put his hands out to break his fall. He did not make a sound. He was dead. The silence that followed Park's death was heavier than before. It was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a presence. It had taken one of them, and it had left a hollow shell behind. For a long moment, no one moved. They all stared at Park's body lying face down in the gray sand. His empty eyes were still open, looking at nothing. There was no blood, no wound. It was as if his mind had simply been switched off. Chul was the first to break the stillness. He moved quickly, his soldier's instincts taking over. He crouched next to Park and checked for a pulse. He shook his head. "He's gone," Chul said, his voice a low, tight whisper. He looked around, his hand gripping his useless tool like a weapon. What did this? Mina slowly walked closer, her scientific curiosity fighting with her terror. She looked at Park's face. "His brain," she said, her voice trembling. "There's no physical damage. It's like his consciousness was just erased." Jin said nothing. He was looking at the spot where Park had been standing. He remembered the flicker of movement he had seen earlier. He remembered how Park had been humming, breaking the silence. The thought formed in his mind, cold and clear. The noise. It was the noise. "We can't stay here," Chul said, standing up. His face was grim. "Everyone stay close. No one makes a sound. We move." The group huddled together, their fear a sharp smell in the thin air. They started walking again, but now every footstep felt like a betrayal. Every rustle of their clothes was too loud. They kept their eyes moving, scanning the shadows between the wrecked ships. Sue was crying silently, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. She held the dead sensor box tightly as if it could protect her. They walked for what felt like hours. The landscape never changed. Gray sand, gray sky, and the bones of dead ships. The silence pressed down on them. It was a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. Jin found himself walking next to Mina. Her face was pale, but her eyes were focused. She was thinking. "It's not an animal," she whispered so quietly Jin could barely hear her. "An animal would leave a mark. It would eat. This just takes the mind." Jin nodded slightly. He pointed to his own head, then made a motion of something floating away. He didn't want to speak. Mina understood. She looked at the wreckage around them. All these ships, their crews. They didn't die in the crashes. They were taken. Like Park. The horror of that idea settled over them. This whole planet was a graveyard of minds. Chul led them towards a large toppled transport ship. It was bigger than the others, and its hull was mostly intact. "We'll shelter in there for a while," he said. "Rest, we can't keep walking in the open." The idea of shelter, of walls, felt good. They carefully climbed through a tear in the ship's metal skin. The inside was dark and dusty. Old control panels were dark. Broken chairs were scattered around. It was a tomb, but it was a tomb with a roof. They sat down in the main cargo area, leaning against the cold walls. Chul divided a small amount of food and water. No one was hungry, but they knew they had to eat. "We need a plan," Chul said, his voice echoing slightly in the metal room. He immediately looked sorry for the noise. "The plan is to not make noise," a woman named Hannah said sharply. She was hugging her knees, rocking back and forth. "Park made noise and he died. We have to find the weapon," Chul insisted, keeping his voice low. "It's our only chance. The Xylosians want it disabled. If we do that, maybe this thing will stop." "Or maybe the thing is the weapon," Mina countered, and the Xylosians were too scared to face it themselves. "They sent us to see what it would do." The argument was cut short by a sound. It was a soft, scraping sound. It came from the dark corridor at the far end of the cargo hold. Everyone froze. The sound came again. Scrape, drag, scrape. It was moving towards them. Chul stood up slowly. He picked up a long, broken piece of metal pipe. He motioned for the others to stay back. He moved towards the corridor, his steps silent. Jin's heart was pounding in his chest. He looked around for anything he could use. He saw a heavy wrench on the floor near his feet. He picked it up. It felt solid in his hand. The scraping sound was closer now. It was just outside the circle of dim light from the doorway. Chul stood ready, his pipe raised. A figure stumbled into the light. It was not an alien monster. It was a man. He was human, or he had been once. He wore the tattered remains of a flight suit from a different human colony. His face was dirty and thin. His eyes were wide and unseeing, just like Park's eyes had been. But this man was still moving. He shuffled forward, his feet scraping on the metal floor. He did not look at them. He did not seem to know they were there. He was making a low, steady humming sound. The same tune Park had been humming. It was the most terrifying thing Jin had ever seen. This man was a ghost. His body was alive, but his mind was gone. He was an empty shell, still playing a broken record of its last moments. The man shuffled past them, humming his mindless tune. He walked straight towards the wall and stood there, his face almost touching the metal. He kept humming. Sue let out a small, choked sob. The humming stopped. In the sudden, absolute silence, the empty man slowly turned his head. His blank eyes seemed to look right through them. Then his body went limp. He collapsed to the floor without a sound. He was finally completely dead. The thing was here. "In the ship with them. Out!" Chul yelled, his voice cracking with fear.
"Everyone out, now!"
Panic erupted. They scrambled for the tear in the hull, pushing and shoving to get out into the open air. Jin was one of the last to get out. He turned back to see Chul standing his ground facing the dark corridor. "Chul, come on," Jin hissed. Chul didn't move. He was staring into the darkness. His face was a mask of confusion, then fear. I can't remember," he whispered. "My daughter's name. What is my daughter's name?" Jin watched in horror as the strong, determined soldier dropped his metal pipe. It clattered loudly on the floor. Chul's eyes lost their focus. They became flat and empty. The memory, the love for his daughter, had been the core of who he was. The thing had taken it first. Chul stood still for a moment, a hollow man. Then he too fell to the floor. Jin didn't wait. He turned and ran. He ran out of the wreck and into the gray twilight, following the others. They ran without direction, fueled by pure terror. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out. They collapsed behind the giant engine nacelle of a fallen warship. There were only 5 of them left now. Jin, Mina, Sue, Hana, and a man named Lee. They were gasping for air, their bodies shaking. "It's in our heads," Mina panted, her voice desperate. "It targets our thoughts, our memories, the things that make us who we are." "How do we fight that?" Lee asked, his voice high with panic. "We can't fight a thought." "Maybe we don't fight," Jin said quietly. Everyone looked at him. It was the first full sentence he had spoken in a long time. "What do you mean?" Mina asked. Park was making noise. Chul was shouting, thinking about fighting. "That man in the ship," he was humming. They were all loud. Jin looked at each of them. What if it doesn't like noise? What if the silence isn't just what's left after? What if the silence is what it wants? Mina stared at him, her scientist's mind working. "You think if we are quiet, truly quiet, it might ignore us?" "It's the only thing that makes sense," Jin said. "This place is called the silent grave, not the noisy grave." It was a desperate, crazy idea. But it was the only idea they had. They decided to keep moving, but now they moved like ghosts. They did not speak. They did not let their tools clink together. They tried to make their footsteps light. They tried to quiet their minds. It was the hardest thing Jin had ever done. His mind was a storm of fear. Memories of home, of his workshop, of sunlight, they all flashed in his head. He tried to push them away. He focused only on his breathing. In and out. He focused on the gray sand under his feet. Nothing else. They walked for another hour. The strain of staying mentally silent was immense. Hana was the next to break. The fear was too much for her. She started to mumble prayers, her words a frantic stream in the quiet. "Please, no, oh please, I want to go home. I don't want to die here." Lee tried to shush her, but it was too late. Hana's mumbling stopped in the middle of a word. She stood still, her eyes wide with a final moment of terror before they went blank. Then she was gone. She fell to the ground. Now there were 4. The sun was setting, making the orange sky turn to a deep, bloody red. The temperature was dropping fast. They needed shelter again, but they were too scared to go inside another ship. They found a deep crack in the ground, a crevice between 2 large rocks. It was cramped and cold, but it was open to the sky. They huddled inside, sharing their body heat for warmth. No one slept. They sat in the dark, listening to the absolute silence. Each of them was fighting their own internal battle, trying to keep their minds still and dark. Jin closed his eyes. He remembered his grandfather teaching him to meditate when he was a boy. He had been restless, unable to sit still. His grandfather had said, "The mind is like a noisy room, Jin. Your job is not to empty the room. Your job is to stop adding more noise. Just watch the noise and let it pass. He had never been very good at it, but now it was the only tool he had. He focused on his breathing. He let the fearful thoughts come, and he let them go without holding on to them. He did not fight them. He just let them be. He made his mind as quiet as he could. He didn't know how long he sat there. The night was completely black with no moon or stars. Then he felt it, a pressure. It was not a sound or a sight. It was a feeling in his mind, a coldness. It was close. It was at the entrance of their crevice. He opened his eyes. He could see nothing in the dark, but he could feel it. The thing, the shade. It was here with them. He could feel its attention moving over them. It lingered on Sue, who was trembling, her mind screaming with silent fear. It lingered on Lee, who was thinking angry, defiant thoughts about fighting back. Then its attention settled on Jin. Jin did not move. He did not think a word of fear. He did not think of fighting or running. He went back to his breathing. In and out. He imagined his mind as a still dark pond. No ripples. No noise. The cold pressure stayed on him. He felt a strange sensation like something was reading him. Not his thoughts, but the quiet space between his thoughts. It was curious. The pressure moved away from him. It went back to Lee. Lee, who was thinking loud, violent thoughts. The pressure spiked. Jin felt a wave of cold terror from Lee, and then nothing. A sudden empty silence where Lee's mind had been. A soft thud as Lee's body slumped over. Then it went to Sue. She was trying so hard to be quiet, but her terror was a bright, loud beacon. The pressure focused on her. Jin felt her mental scream, and then it was cut off. Another silence. Another thud. Now it was just Jin and Mina in the dark. He could feel her next to him, rigid with fear. He could almost hear her mind racing, trying to find a scientific solution, a reason, an answer. The pressure moved to her. Jin reached out in the darkness and found her hand. He squeezed it gently. He didn't send her a thought. He didn't say, "Be quiet," in his mind. He just sent a feeling of calm, a feeling of the still, dark pond. He felt her hand tremble in his. Then he felt her take a slow, deep breath. She squeezed his hand back. She understood. She stopped trying to think. She just tried to be. The cold pressure lingered on Mina for a long time. It was testing her. Jin held his own silence, supporting her with his quiet. Then the pressure faded. It withdrew from the crevice and was gone. They were alone. Jin and Mina sat in the darkness, holding hands, not moving, not thinking. They had survived the night. But Jin knew the truth. They had not defeated the thing that hunted them. They had only passed its test, and the test was not over. The first gray light of morning found them still sitting in the crevice. Their hands were still clasped together, a lifeline in the dark. Lee and Sue were gone. Their bodies were just empty shells now, like the others. Jin and Mina were the last ones. Slowly, carefully, they let go of each other's hands. They did not speak. Words were noise. Thoughts were danger. They shared a look, and it was enough. They had to move. They climbed out of the crevice. The world was just as gray and dead as the day before. The wrecked ships looked like giant bones in the pale light. They started walking again. There was no plan anymore. No mission to find a weapon. The only mission was to stay quiet. To survive, Jin led the way. He moved with a new purpose. He was not just looking for a safe path. He was looking for something else. He remembered the empty man in the ship, the one who had been humming. That man had survived for a while. His mind had been gone, but his body had lived. The thing had not taken him until he came near them. Why, he had an idea. It was a strange idea, but it was all he had. He changed their direction, walking towards a part of the graveyard where the ships were older, more rusted. He was looking for a ship that was not just crashed but settled. A ship that had been here a long, long time. He found one. It was a small scout ship. Its design was strange and ancient. It was half buried in the sand, and a small, dusty hatch was open. He pointed to it and looked at Mina. She looked unsure, but she nodded. They climbed inside. The air was thick with dust. Everything was still and silent. On the floor near the pilot's chair was a skeleton. It was not human. It had long, thin bones. It had been there for centuries. This was what was left of the body. The mind had been taken long ago. Jin moved to a control panel. It was covered in strange symbols. He pointed at it, then at his own head, and shook his head. He was telling her the ship's systems were dead, just like everything else. Then he did something strange. He took a small power cell from his survival pack. It was meant for a lamp or a tool. He placed it on the dead control panel. He looked at Mina, put a finger to his lips, and then he stepped back. He sat down on the floor, cross-legged. He closed his eyes and began to breathe slowly. He made his mind quiet. Mina watched him, completely confused. What was he doing? Was he just giving up? Offering a gift to the thing that hunted them? They waited. An hour passed. Nothing happened. Then Jin felt it. The familiar cold pressure at the edge of his mind. The shade was here. It was inside the ship with them. Mina froze, her eyes wide with fear. Jin did not move. He kept his breathing steady. He kept his mind like a flat, calm lake. The pressure moved around the small ship. It ignored the skeleton. That mind was already gone, long digested. It moved over Mina. She fought to control her panic, to mimic Jin's stillness. The pressure lingered, then moved on. It went to the control panel. It focused on the power cell. The small, solid-state power cell had potential energy. It was a tiny, silent promise of noise and activity. To the shade, it was like a single bright note in the silence. Jin watched from behind his closed eyes. He felt the shade's attention on the cell. He felt a subtle shift in the pressure. It was not hostile, it was interested. There was no sound, no flash of light, but Jin felt it happen. The power cell died. Its internal charge was completely drained, not used but erased. The potential for noise was gone. It was now just a dead piece of metal. The shade had consumed it. The cold pressure lingered for a moment longer. It touched Jin's mind again. This time there was no threat in it. There was only a simple, cold curiosity. Then it was gone. Jin opened his eyes. Mina was staring at him, her face a mixture of terror and amazement. He understands, Jin whispered, the words barely a breath. It doesn't want to kill us. It just hates the noise. We are noisy, but we can offer it quiet things. It was a breakthrough, but a terrifying one. They were not fighting a monster. They were trying to make friends with a force of nature that saw their thoughts as pollution. Over the next few days, a new routine began. They were like monks in a desert of metal. They moved slowly. They spoke only when absolutely necessary, and then only in whispers. They learned to control their minds, to let thoughts pass through without grabbing onto them. Jin became better at it. He would spend hours just sitting, watching the gray sky, thinking of nothing. Mina struggled more. Her mind was always asking questions, always analyzing. It was hard for her to turn it off. Jin continued his strange offering. He would find broken pieces of technology. A circuit board from a console, a dead communicator, a powered-down weapon. He would place them in a clear spot, a silent offering. He would sit nearby and be still, and the shade would come. It would always come. It would examine the offering, this piece of potential noise, and it would silence it forever, draining it of all energy. Each time it did, Jin felt its presence linger near him a little longer. It was getting used to him. He started to try to communicate, not with words. Words were noise. He tried with feelings. When he placed an offering, he would project a feeling of peace, a feeling of silence. When he felt the shade near, he would project a feeling of thanks, a feeling of companionship. It was slow, difficult work. He felt like a man trying to tame a wild shadow. One afternoon, Mina was trying to help. She found a small data slate that was slightly cracked. She brought it to their usual offering spot. But as she placed it down, her scientific mind took over. She started thinking about how the slate worked, about the data that might be inside. Her thoughts were not loud, but they were complex. They were a low, buzzing hum of intellect. The shade appeared instantly. The cold pressure was sharp and angry. It focused entirely on Mina. She gasped and fell to her knees, clutching her head. "It hurts," she whimpered. "It's so loud in my head. It's tearing it apart." Jin rushed to her side. He didn't shout. He didn't think a violent thought. He stood between Mina and the feeling of the shade. He looked right at the empty space where the pressure was strongest. He projected a single, clear image. Not a word. An image of a shield. A quiet, dark shield protecting Mina. He projected a feeling of apology. A feeling of a mistake, not an attack. He then pointed to the data slate and made a wiping motion with his hand. "Silence this." "It is for you." The angry pressure did not go away, but it lessened. It shifted from Mina to the data slate. The slate flickered for a microsecond and then went permanently dark. The shade had taken its offering, but it was not satisfied. The brief noise from Mina's mind had upset it. The pressure turned back to her. She was crying softly, her mind in chaos from the pain. Jin knew it was going to take her. Her mind was too loud now, too damaged to quiet down. He did the only thing he could think of. He knelt in front of the empty space. He bowed his head. He projected the strongest, purest feeling he could manage. It was not a thought. It was a deep, wordless plea. It was the feeling of being alone. The feeling of losing his last friend. The silent, empty grief that would be left if she was gone. He showed the shade what its silence would truly mean for him. Not just peace, but loneliness. The cold pressure held still. It was considering him. It had understood his offerings. It had understood his quiet. Now it was understanding his emotion, an emotion that was itself quiet and deep. The pressure faded from Mina. It rested on Jin for a long, long moment. He felt it seeing right through him. It saw his memories of home. It saw his fear of the Xylotians. It saw his simple desire to protect the one person left with him. Then the shade was gone. Mina's crying slowed. The pain in her head faded. She looked at Jin, her eyes full of tears and wonder. You talked to it." Jin shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I listened. That was the turning point. After that, the shade was always near, but it was no longer a hunter. It was a silent companion, a guardian. It would sometimes appear when Jin was sitting quietly, just to be near his stillness. Jin knew their time was running out. Their food and water were low. They could not live on this dead world forever. He had to make the final request. He went to their offering spot. He did not bring a piece of technology. He brought himself and his quiet mind. He sat and waited. The shade came. Its presence was familiar now, a cold comfort. Jin closed his eyes. He formed a picture in his mind. It was a clear, simple picture. He showed the shade the Xylosian commander, Kael Thar. He showed him the massive dreadnought, the World Reaper hanging in space. He made the image of the ship loud. He filled it with the feeling of arrogant thoughts, of cruel intentions, of a deafening mental noise. Then, he showed an image of himself and Mina. He showed them on a small working ship. He filled this image with a feeling of quiet, a feeling of peace, a feeling of going home. He connected the two images. To get the quiet ship, they had to silence the loud one. He opened his eyes. The shade's presence was very strong. He felt a new sensation from it. It was not curiosity. It was not hunger. It was agreement. It understood the problem. The Xylosians were the source of a great offensive noise. They had sent the noisy humans here as an insult. They were the enemy of silence. The shade had been alone for so long, tormented by the occasional noisy intruder. Jin was the first being who had not been noisy, the first who had offered it companionship instead of fear, the first who understood its nature. Jin had not tamed the shadow. He had shown the shadow a common enemy. He stood up and walked back to the small shelter they were using. Mina was waiting. "It's time," he said, his voice firm. "We're leaving." Mina looked at the dead planet around them. "How?" "Our ship is wrecked." Jin looked towards the sky to where the Xylosian dreadnought was waiting. "We won't need our ship," he said. "We have an ally, and he's going to give us a ride." The old wrecked dropship was a tomb. It was cold and dark inside, a metal coffin half buried in the gray sand. But it was their only hope. Jin and Mina worked in silence, their movements slow and careful. They were not trying to fix the ship. That was impossible. Every system was dead, killed by the planet's strange influence. They were cleaning it. They pulled the body of the dead pilot from the chair and laid him respectfully to the side. They straightened the broken seats. They wiped the dust from the viewport. It was a strange, peaceful ritual. They were preparing a vessel. Jin had explained his plan without words, using gestures and simple drawings in the sand. They would call the Xylosians. They would use the one thing on this planet that still had a sliver of power, the emergency locator beacon. It was a simple device isolated from the main ship's systems. It was designed to scream into the void, to shout, "Here I am," until its battery died. It was the noisiest thing they could think of. When the small cabin was as clean and orderly as they could make it, Jin went to the emergency panel. He looked at Mina. She nodded, her face pale but determined. She sat in the co-pilot's chair and closed her eyes, beginning her breathing exercises. She made her mind a quiet pool. Jin took a deep breath. This was the dangerous part. He was about to make the most terrible noise on the entire silent grave. He pulled the red lever on the emergency panel. A sharp, piercing beep echoed through the dead ship. A small red light on the console began to flash. Beep, beep, beep. It was a painfully loud sound in the absolute quiet. Jin felt a jolt of fear. This was like screaming in a dark forest full of predators. He immediately let go of the lever and stepped back. He sat on the floor cross-legged and closed his eyes. He emptied his mind. He and Mina became islands of silence in the middle of the screaming beacon. He did not have to wait long. The cold presence of the shade filled the dropship instantly. The pressure was intense, a wave of pure fury. The beacon was an insult, a violation. The flashing light was a visual scream. Jin felt the shade's attention lock onto the beacon. The furious pressure focused into a sharp point. The beep stopped in the middle of a tone. The flashing light died. The beacon was silenced forever, its energy erased completely. The silence that returned was deeper than before. The shade was angry. Its presence swirled around the ship, a storm of cold rage. It had been disturbed in its home. Now was the moment. Jin did not move. He did not open his eyes. He projected a single clear feeling towards the furious presence. He showed it the source of the noise, not the little beacon. The beacon was just a tool. He showed it the Xylosian dreadnought again, the World Reaper. He made the image of the big ship pulse with the same annoying, arrogant energy as the beacon, but 1,000 times louder. He showed that the little beacon was a cry for help from the quiet ones, directed at the noisy ones in the sky. The shade's anger shifted. It understood. The real noise was not here. The real noise was up there. The noisy ones had sent this little noise to disturb its peace. Jin then projected his final image. He showed himself and Mina, sitting quietly in the dead dropship. He showed the shade wrapping around them, enveloping them. He showed the three of them together, rising from the planet, moving as one towards the noisy ship in the sky. He was asking for a ride. The shade's presence calmed. The cold fury settled into a cold purpose. It understood the mission. Eradicate the source of the noise. Jin felt a strange sensation. It was not a sound or a sight. It was a question, formed directly in his mind without words. It was a simple cold concept. Ready? Jin opened his eyes and looked at Mina. He gave a single, slow nod. He projected back one clear feeling. Ready. High above the planet, on the bridge of the World Reaper, Commander Kael'thar was bored. Conquering was easy. Governing was tedious. He was reviewing reports on resource extraction from the human colony when an alarm chirped on a console. A junior officer looked at his screen. "Commander," he said, "we are receiving a signal from the surface of the silent grave." Kael'thar looked up. His interest sparked. "A signal? What kind of signal?" "It is a very weak signal, Commander. It is an emergency locator beacon from the human dropship." Kael'thar stood up and walked to the officer's station. He looked at the screen. A small, blinking dot on the planet's surface represented the beacon. It was active. A slow, cruel smile spread across his scaled face. So one of the humans had survived the crash. They had been hiding all this time, and now, in a moment of weakness or desperation, they had triggered their beacon. They were begging for rescue. This was perfect. He could finally see what was on that planet. He would tractor the survivor in, rip the information from their mind, and then execute them. He might even learn the secret of the planet's defense system. "Lock onto that signal," Kael'thar ordered. "Prepare a tractor beam, and ready an interrogation team in the main hangar bay. I want to see this human myself." The crew moved with efficient speed. The massive ship turned slightly, aligning itself with the signal. A low hum filled the bridge as the tractor beam generators powered up. "Signal is fading, Commander," the officer said. "It has stopped." "No matter," Kael'thar said. "We have its location. Bring it in." A beam of blue energy shot out from the belly of the dreadnought and touched the planet's surface. It enveloped the broken dropship. Slowly, carefully, The tractor beam lifted the small ship from the gray sand and began pulling it up through the atmosphere towards the waiting hangar bay. Kael'thar watched on the main view screen. The dropship was a wreck. It was scorched and torn. He laughed. Look at it. They crashed. They have been living in that wreck for days. They are probably half mad with fear. He left the bridge and strode towards the hangar bay. He wanted to see the fear in the human's eyes up close. Inside the dropship, Jin and Mina felt a strange lurch. Then they were weightless. The ship was moving. They were being pulled up. The plan was working. They did not cheer. They did not speak. They remained perfectly still, their minds held in a state of quiet readiness. Jin could feel the shade all around them. It was not inside the ship with them, but it was holding on to the ship, clinging to its hull like a dark shadow. It was a passenger hidden from sight. The journey up through the atmosphere was smooth. The tractor beam did all the work. Soon the black of space replaced the gray of the planet outside the viewport. Then, the massive, intimidating shape of the World Reaper filled the window. The dropship passed through the energy field of the hangar bay and settled onto the deck with a soft clang. The tractor beam disengaged. Jin and Mina heard the hiss of equalizing pressure. Then the loud metallic clang of the hangar bay doors sealing shut. They were inside the Xylosian ship. They could hear noises now. Hissing voices. The clatter of armored feet on the metal deck. The hum of the ship's systems. After the absolute silence of the planet, it was a roaring cacophony. Jin looked at Mina. This was it. He took a slow, deep breath and stood up. Mina stood up beside him. They walked to the dropship's damaged airlock. Jin put his hand on the manual release lever. He looked at the metal wall, knowing the shade was just on the other side, waiting for his signal. He projected a single feeling. Now. He pulled the lever. The airlock door slid open with a grinding sound. Bright light from the hangar bay flooded into the dark dropship. Jin stepped out first, followed closely by Mina. The scene before them was exactly as he had imagined it. The large hangar bay was filled with 2 rows of armed Xylosian soldiers. They stood at attention, their weapons held ready. Their black, cold eyes were fixed on him. In the middle of the pathway stood Commander Kael'thar, a look of smug victory on his face. Kael'thar looked Jin up and down. The human was thin and dirty. His clothes were torn. He looked weak. He carried no weapons. The woman behind him looked just as pitiful. So, Kael'thar hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. The survivor, you are more stubborn than you look. Did you have a nice vacation on the surface? Did you find the weapon for me? Or have you just come to beg for a quick death? Jin said nothing. He just looked at Kael'thar. His eyes were not the eyes of a broken man. They were calm and steady. He looked past the commander at the empty space behind him and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a signal to a person. It was a signal to the silence itself. Kael'thar frowned. The human's lack of fear was irritating. Seize them, he barked. The soldiers began to move forward. Then the lights in the hangar bay flickered. A wave of cold washed through the large room. It was not a temperature change. It was a wave of pure primal dread. It was a feeling of something ancient and terrible waking up. The Xylosian soldiers stopped. They looked around, confused. The feeling of dread grew stronger. It pressed down on their minds. One of the soldiers in the front row suddenly froze. His weapon clattered from his hands. He stood perfectly still, his eyes wide. Then his eyes went blank, empty. There was no one behind them anymore. He crumpled to the floor without a sound. Panic erupted. Another soldier fell. Then another. They were dropping like flies. Their minds erased before their bodies hit the ground. There was no enemy to shoot at. No shield to break. They were being killed by nothing. By silence, Kael'thar stared in horror. He saw a shimmer in the air near Jin, a darkness that was deeper than the shadows, a shape that was not a shape. It was the thing from the planet. The human had not disabled it. He had not escaped it. He had brought it with him. The human looked at Kael'thar, and for the first time he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos. You were wrong, Jin said. It's not a weapon. He glanced at the dark shimmer standing beside him, a terrifying partner in the chaos. It's a friend. Chaos swallowed the hangar bay. The organized rows of Xylosian soldiers broke apart. They fired their weapons at nothing, energy bolts sizzling through the air and hitting the walls. It was useless. The thing hunting them was not solid. It was a ghost in the machine of their minds. Jin and Mina stood perfectly still near their wrecked dropship. The shade moved around them like a protective storm. Any Zalosian who came too close simply stopped. Their thoughts were loud, frantic, and bright with fear. To the shade, they were screaming targets. They were silenced in an instant, their bodies dropping to add to the growing clutter on the floor. Commander Kael'thar backed away, his cold confidence shattered. He saw his elite guards fall without a fight. He saw the two humans untouched in the middle of the storm. The human Jin was just watching him. His calm face was more terrifying than any battle cry. "Stop it!" Kael'thar screamed, his voice shrill. He pointed a shaking claw at Jin. "Kill the human!" "He is controlling it!" A few soldiers tried to obey. They raised their rifles. But before their fingers could pull the triggers, the shade found them. Their arms went limp. Their weapons fell. Then they fell too, their minds wiped clean. Jin knew they could not stay in the hangar. They had to move. He looked at Mina and gestured with his head towards the large main door. She nodded, her face tight with fear, but her mind held in a firm, quiet grip. They started to walk. They did not run. Running was noisy. They moved slowly and deliberately through the carnage. The shade flowed ahead of them, a wave of silence preceding their steps. Alarms began to blare, a harsh grating sound. The lights flickered on and off, casting the nightmare scene in strobes of light and shadow. They reached the door. It was sealed shut. Jin looked at the control panel, but it was complex and alien. Mina pushed past him. Her scientist's mind, now focused and quiet, analyzed the panel. She didn't try to understand it. She just looked for the simplest parts. She pointed to a thick bundle of wires leading into the wall. She looked at Jin, then at the dark presence of the shade, and made a cutting motion with her hand. Jin understood. He projected the image to the shade. This. Silence this. The shade's attention turned to the wires. There was a small shower of sparks from the wall panel. The metal around the wires turned black and cold. The door, deprived of power, slid open with a grinding shriek. They moved into the corridor beyond. It was wide and empty, but they could hear the sounds of running feet and panicked shouts echoing from further inside the ship. The Zylosians knew they were under attack, but they did not understand what the attack was. Jin had one goal. He needed to find the bridge. He needed to see this through to the end. He led the way, relying on his sense of direction and the layout of similar human ships. The shade was their guide and their weapon. It seemed to sense the noisiest concentrations of minds and flowed towards them. They would round a corner and find a squad of soldiers lying on the floor, already empty. The path was being cleared for them. They found a lift. Mina used the same method to open the doors. They stepped inside. Jin looked at the symbols for the different decks. One of them looked important, central. He pointed to it. Mina looked at the panel and then at the shade. The shade's presence touched the panel. The symbol for the bridge lit up for a second, then went dark. The lift shuddered and began to move upwards. When the doors opened, they were on the bridge. It was a large circular room filled with glowing consoles and large view screens. The crew was in a state of total panic. Some were trying to fight, firing their weapons at the empty air as the shade swept through the room. Others were trying to send distress calls. Their minds were a roaring fire of fear and confusion. In the center of the chaos stood Commander Kael'thar. He had reached the bridge just before them. He was shouting orders that no one could hear. He turned and his eyes met Jin's. Hatred and terror warred on his face. He raised a large ornate pistol. You bring this filth onto my ship." He screamed and fired. The energy bolt never reached Jin. It faded in midair, dissolving into nothingness a meter from his chest. The shade had simply unmade it. Kael'thar stared in disbelief. The shade turned its full attention to him. The commander was the noisiest thing on the ship. His arrogance, his fury, his terror, it was a blinding beacon. Jin walked slowly towards him. The battle on the bridge was ending around them. One by one, the crew fell silent, slumping over their consoles. The alarms stopped blaring. The only sounds were the hum of the ship and Kael'thar's ragged breathing. "What is it?" Kael'thar whispered, his weapon hanging limp in his hand. He could feel the shade now, the cold pressure focusing on him, peeling back the layers of his mind. "What have you done?" "You sent us to a silent grave," Jin said, his voice calm. "You thought it was our doom. But you were the one being loud. You were the one it couldn't stand. Jin stopped in front of him. He was not a soldier. He was a mechanic. But in that moment, he held all the power. You wanted to see the weapon, Jin said. Well, now you have. The shade closed in. Kael'thar's eyes went wide. He clutched his head. My thoughts. I can't. He was a commander, a being of order and control. Now he could feel his own mind, his very self, being unraveled. The memories of his victories, his ambitions, his pride, it was all being taken away, erased into a blank, silent void. No. Please. He begged, his voice a hollow whisper. But there was no mercy in silence. Kael'thar's body did not fall. He simply stood there, his eyes empty. He was a shell. The mighty commander of the World Reaper was gone. All that was left was a quiet, empty vessel. The bridge was completely silent now. Every Zylosian was gone. The view screen showed the starfield outside, peaceful and calm. The ship drifted, a ghost ship commanded by the dead. Jin walked to the main command chair. He looked at the complex controls. He did not need to understand them. He looked at the shade, which now filled the bridge with its peaceful, cold presence. He projected a final series of images. He showed the ship turning around. He showed it flying away from the human colony, away from this sector of space. He showed it heading out into the empty, silent blackness between galaxies, a place of eternal quiet. The shade understood. It was a fitting end for this noisy machine. Jin felt the ship vibrate as the engines powered up. On the main view screen, the stars began to move. The World Reaper was turning, beginning its final silent journey. Their work was done. Jin and Mina made their way back to the hangar bay. They did not take a Zylosian ship. They were not thieves. They were survivors. They went to a small, human-looking scout ship that was parked in a corner. It was probably a prize of war. Mina went to the controls. This technology she could understand. She began the startup sequence. The engines hummed to life. The systems lit up. For the first time in weeks, technology worked around them. The shade did not stop them. It watched, a silent observer. Jin stood at the hangar bay door, looking back into the dark, empty ship. He could feel the shade there. It was not coming with them. Its place was here in the silence or out in the void, not with the noisy humans. He sent it one last feeling. It was not a word of thanks because thanks were noisy. It was a feeling of deep, quiet gratitude, a feeling of friendship forged in silence. He felt a final, gentle touch on his mind like a cold breeze, a feeling of farewell. Then the presence was gone, retreating deep into the heart of the Zylosian ship. The hangar bay door opened. The scout ship lifted off and flew out into the freedom of space. Behind them, the massive World Reaper continued its slow, silent turn, a giant tomb heading for its final resting place in the dark. Jin sat in the co-pilot's chair and watched the stars. They were going home. He was safe, but he knew he would never be the same. A part of him would always miss the quiet,